Hi everyone, so welcome to the Mastermind Roundtable. And today we're so glad to have BJ to join us. And BJ, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience?
Firstly, good evening everyone. Maurice, thank you for introducing me. Obviously he knows me as BJ. My name is Vishwajyoti Upadhyay. Everybody calls me as BJ. That's easier and very short way to address me. Thank you for having me today. It's a great pleasure to share some of my thoughts, and just to reiterate that it's my personal views and I would like to share based on my experience. I've been in banking for over 25 years, having worked in different markets in India, in Middle East, have covered and worked in Indonesia, Singapore, short stints in Australia, and of course for the last 15 years in China, and then in Hong Kong for the last 10 years. Overall, it's been a great journey for me and worked across different areas within corporate and investment banking. And I'm looking forward to having this chat with Maurice.
Thank you, BJ. And so BJ, I think in today's talks, we are going to cover some very hit topics, right? Such as, how does the banking model going to evolve, right? With so many uncertainties and the global trend. And we also cover about, I think, the innovation of global payments. And interestingly, how are banks actually collaborating or competing with your competitors in the market, such as the fintech companies, such as the e-wallet providers, right? And of course, we want to also create value for the fresh, professionals, right? Yeah. So I think let's go one by one. So first of all, based on your first-hand observation, how do you see banking services evolving from traditional model to a future-proof model?
So if you look at banking, obviously over the last 15 years, if you take it from global financial crisis, pre-COVID to COVID and then post-COVID, there is a huge amount of push to digitize and to be able to ensure that banking is being supported for across the wholesale bank, retail bank, so that it's easy to bank and easy for customers to have that banking experience. I think the first part, therefore, is around client centricity, having that customer experience, which is very critical in banking. And those are coming through with new types of banks which are coming in, like, for example, virtual banks, where you can actually do banking without going into a physical branch. And if you go to a physical branch, the experience is more like a lounge where you can actually discuss on, wealth products, etc. within banking itself. The second part of it is what is changing, and the focus on a lot of the banks is around climate change, around sustainability, and how they are able to fine-tune their products to be able to cater to that requirement across different areas, whether it is related to existing industries which are already in this space or transition industries as well. The third is use of data and AI, which is where we see that most of the banks are now getting into, and therefore are able to use that to provide that better service. So if you look at the overall banking, finance, insurance space, this is the biggest area where we see is going to change in the coming 2 to 3 years' time. And it would be a step change in terms of making it more useful, user-friendly for clients and customers.
Thank you, BJ. I think you mentioned so many keywords there. Such as virtual banks, right? And also the use of data. And also how does banks do to improve the customer journey? So which are, I think, very important priorities for all banks to actually succeed in the future. Yep. So my second question is, okay, what kind of impact can bank actually put on the table in terms of innovation of global payments in nowadays environment?
See, obviously innovation is happening. So for example, if you look at Hong Kong per se, faster payment is a big example of how you can do real-time payments across, both retail as well as within the wholesale space, to be able to support over and above just doing, let's say, an RTGS payment or a SWIFT, payment to be done like an ITT or an inward TT or an OTT. But what I actually see more is that there is a lot of collaboration which is happening to do new things, and which is also from an industry perspective. So for example, ISO related changes which are coming in, ISO 20022, or, if there is alternative gateway being used. So apart from using SWIFT, there is SIPS as well, which is China interbank payment related. And these are cross-border payments which can be done. This is over and above doing domestic payments in renminbi. So this allows not only to be doing payments like the way we do in local currency or US dollar, but also in cross currency. And it could be done like, for example, mBridge, which has been set up by HKMA. And that's very critical in terms of facilitating cross-border payments, let's say between Hong Kong and Thailand or Hong Kong and UAE. And there you're not using US dollar. You're actually doing payments in local currency of Hong Kong, local currency of UAE like dirhams, or local currency of Thailand like Thai baht. I think those are the changes which will make payment, much more easier, much more accessible for people to use, and therefore to be able to do those cross-border transactions from there, drawing.
So when we're talking about the global payments, it's not just about how fast you can do your payments, but also about on what infrastructure, on what channel, right? And in what standard. So I think everyone got to bear in mind about the ISO 2022. I think that's going to kind of sweep the whole industry and going to happen very soon. It's actually already happening too, right?
Yes.
Okay. So my third question is, we have to talk about tariff, right? So, tariff, the issue give rise to so many uncertainties and ups and downs in current markets. So how do you see current tariff influence the global trade and supply chain? And how are banks actually adapting to the resulting uncertainties and impacts?
So before I go on tariff, Mars, I think the important one for ISO is this is a change which is happening globally. Okay, the first of those changes would come in by end of this year. And this is going to be, step-by-step changes over the next couple of years, which would make things easier in terms of the overall payment infrastructure. Coming to tariffs, tariffs is not new. If you look at it, we had heard this term a lot during the first term of Mr. Trump. And so it has again come back, in different shapes and forms. It has been much more worldwide being used, not only, specific to one country or one product. So the first thing is obviously, if you look at it from a global trade point of view, global trade has moved to a situation of where supply chains are interdependent. And obviously, the first thing which you will observe is what would therefore happen to these interdependencies of supply chain, where let's say, manufacturing is done where the things are being easily produced, the labor is available, the factories are available, and therefore you're able to produce it. By putting in tariffs, what it would do is it will have an impact in terms of actually finding the efficiencies which was already there within the global trade space. But having said that, everything has an opportunity as well, as much as it is also creates, a certain amount of short-term difficulties. It is about actually reorienting. So what we see, and as a finance, a professional, one of the things which we talk when we have conversations with the client is how can we actually then ensure that areas where we can redirect some of these trades. So, for example, the growth which we see within the China-Middle East corridor or the China-ASEAN corridor, okay, or the growth within the European, corridor itself across different countries. Now, those are things, if you look at Europe, 70% is actually internally sourced. Right? You don't need to get it from other locations. But there are opportunities which are there. Or for example, China with South America. That's another area. Or India for that matter. India acting as a big location for global supply chain and also regional supply chain. So what we will see is there'll be some portion of that global supply chain definitely would remain because we cannot move everything. But you will also see nearshoring, friendshoring as areas of where, supply chains would shift. Okay. And therefore the trade would shift as well.
Right. I think at the end, if those trades, I think the location of those trades change, I would also foresee some demand, such as FX hedging and kind of cross-border fund flows, right? So, but do you also see there might be certain possibilities that the global trade will shrink from globally to actually domestically because people want to avoid this kind of uncertainties?
So I think global trade is directly proportional to the demand and supply, right? So if you look at it from that space, that the demand will always be there. Yes, for a short period of time, there might be changes, there might be certain dislocation. But if you look at it on a, overall, let's say a 10-year horizon and all, global trade has been growing quite steadily and it will continue to grow. And also people's requirement are also there. there. As people become affluent, as people become, ability to have money to spend, in terms of disposable income, they will be able to then want goods, and therefore that would actually facilitate the growth. So the pie is what I feel is definitely going to grow over the years.
I hope the audience will get the message that when we are talking about the impact of tariffs, right, don't just look at the immediate impact. You have to look beyond, right?
Yes.
I mean, globally and broadly, because I think the resulting effect on consequences could be quite varied and quite broad, right? The last question, if some fresh graduate, they want to join the banking sector now, what would be the advice that you want to actually provide to these young generations?
So I think for me, the way I see it is, and it's across, people who are coming into the finance space, or even people who have had, 3 to 4 years of experience. The most important thing is resilience and being adaptable. I think that's very, very important in the current, ever-changing world. So you should be willing to be curious, willing to learn, upskill, relearn things. I think that's essentially very important. Obviously, being digitally savvy, being tech proficient is another area which is very critical. And I think most young professionals are actually there. The question is, how do you actually use it? One is to know that you are tech savvy. Second is to use that technology to be able to find right outcomes. I think that's very important as well. The last part of it is, in my view, which is very critical, is that irrespective of what's happening within the finance space, within what you see from a geopolitics perspective, the important part of it is, if you are curious, if you're always willing to ask questions, if you're willing to understand things and learn, there is definitely more and more opportunities which will come in. So it is not something where the opportunity is going away. Actually, there's a lot of opportunities to collaborate, whether within banks with other fintechs, and as well as what we see in the broader ecosystem of finance.
Totally agree. So what BJ is saying is basically, I think the opportunities are still a lot, right? But in the meantime, I think for fresh graduates, you got to have, I would say, hybrid of skill sets and capabilities, right? Not just about communication, not just about your technical skills, but you got to understand the world, understand what's happening around us, right? And also be tech savvy, which is also very important. The last thing is you got to be able to apply what you learned in school to workplace in a very flexible way, right? So thank you so much, BJ, tonight. And I hope our audience tonight will also enjoy our chat. BJ, what's your last words?
No, I think firstly, thank you, Morris, for this extremely useful session, and thanks for very, very difficult questions. But also the way you asked it was made me also think a lot in terms of how to respond so that it is audience friendly. But more importantly, to keep it in a very chat and a very friendly manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye for now.